Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and economic freedom in Wichita and Kansas. And if you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, well, just visit wichitaliberty.org, subscribe to the email newsletter, like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook, and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, as you can see here, I'm a little bit out of sorts this week. I had a condition in my hand that needed correction, so I had surgery. And although I'm still recovering, everything is fine. But I have developed a renewed appreciation for people who don't have full use of all the facilities of their bodies. Now, there are some new news media outlets in town. One is a product of this television station, KGBT, and of Tom Pappert, who does the production work for Wichita Liberty TV. It's called The Honest Media. Tom says, Tom Pappert and Craig Chrysler take on the dishonest media narrative on The Honest Media. Protests turned into riots, biased journalism from mainstream outlets, unfair and inaccurate quotation, and logical fallacies are destroyed weekly on The Honest Media. This is broadcast Thursday at 9 p.m. on channel 26.7, repeated Saturday at 5 p.m. on 26.1, also AT&T U-verse channel 49. You can also find the show on Facebook on its page, The Honest Media, and you can view the episodes on YouTube. And by the way, Tom's traveling to Cleveland this week to cover the Republican convention. Check the Honest Media page on Facebook for that coverage. You can also find it on Twitter at The Honest Media. Well, the other new news media creation is one from me. It's a Facebook page called Kansas Memo. So why did I start yet another Facebook page? Well, I grew tired of hearing conservatives criticize the liberal Kansas mainstream news media and complain that there was no alternative. Now, the criticism of the liberal media is appropriate and well-deserved. But it is not true that there is no alternative. There are individuals and organizations writing about Kansas government and public policy from a conservative and free market-oriented perspective. There's the Kansas Policy Institute, for example. There's me. There's Gidget Southway in Johnson County. On the radio, there's Joseph Ashby and Andy Hoosier. And through Kansas Memo, I hope to make these news and commentary sources easier to find. So here's what you need to do. And this is how to make best use of Facebook pages that you really like. Well, first of all, of course, you need to find them on Facebook. And a good way to do that is to use the search bar within Facebook up at the top of the page. Then once you find the page, click the like button on the page. That's important as it tells Facebook that you're interested in this topic, and Facebook will show material from it in your news feed. And then, under that like button, there is a little menu, and one item on this menu is See First. This means that material from this page will be shown to you first in your news feed, and that's very handy. And then if you want to even go a step further, under the same like menu, you can select to receive notifications from the page. Notifications take a variety of forms depending on whether you use Facebook on a desktop computer or on a mobile device. But either way, notifications are a way to receive immediate notification of new material from pages, or from people too, that you care about. Well, okay, sorry to digress into tech time for a moment, but I'd really like for you to like Kansas Memo on Facebook and also Tom's show, The Honest Media. Now, speaking of Facebook, It really does provide a way for the average person to make material available on a widespread basis. And the regular news media doesn't really like this. Before the internet and before things like Facebook and Twitter specifically, the average person did not have much way to get out their opinions. You could write a letter to the newspaper, but then the newspaper decides whether or not to print your letter, and most newspapers reserve the right to edit your submission. Well, you could also build up a personal email list and send material to people that way. But Facebook, Twitter too, provide a way to bypass these gatekeepers. Here we have a candidate for the Kansas Senate who has used Facebook to report on her experience being interviewed by the Wichita Eagle. This is from Renee Erickson's Facebook page. She's running for the Kansas Senate from a district that covers Newton and Harvey County and part of Sedgwick County. And here's part of what she posted on Facebook. She wrote, "We know there's a bias in media, but I had no idea they were such bullies. I accepted the Wichita Eagle's invitation for an interview, but apparently Marcia Wirtz, Rhonda Holman, and especially Philip Brownlee seemed less interested in what I had to say as they were in telling me what they thought about everything from school budgets to raising taxes." And they love raising taxes, by the way, she adds. "And even though I, Renee Erickson this is a public school board member and a middle school principal, they wanted to tell me about school budgets." Really, she writes. And she says, "It would seem the Eagle opinion staff is really just interested in their own opinion. When I said taxes are a deterrent and raising taxes does not stimulate private sector growth, I thought they were going to rend their garments. Brownlee used classic bullying tactics like ridicule and ad hominem attacks. I'm not sure if his bullying was done intentionally because he thought I'd cower or if he was just so emotionally out of it he couldn't control himself. Either way, I doubled down and stood my ground." And continuing from Renee Erickson, she wrote, "Brownlee said California's economy was an example Kansas should emulate. Silly me. I thought blue state California was losing jobs to red state Texas. And when I asked Philip what source he was using and to please send that information to me, I think he grunted, but he did not say that he would. I have no problem with someone being upfront about their liberal agenda. Then we can have an honest dialogue. But the public needs to know they are being manipulated by a liberal press masquerading as balanced and unbiased." And still from Renee Erickson on her Facebook page, "And the public deserves to know when legislators campaign one way and vote the opposite. It's a sweet deal for liberals," she writes. "Register Republican, so you get cover from voters who don't know any better. Then vote with liberals in Topeka, so you get cover from Democrats and the press who do know exactly what's going on. But per Kansas news outlets, there are 0 liberals in the state. Only moderates and ultra-conservatives. No bias there, right?" Well, that was from Renee Erickson, candidate for the Kansas Senate, and I did shorten her remarks there. Now, if you are a conservative or libertarian, well, you are probably not surprised to learn that there is a liberal bias at the Wichita Eagle. Now, Rhonda Holman and Philip Brownlee are opinion writers, and they are free to write whatever they want. You can agree with them or not. And one factor you might consider is what types of factual information they use to base their opinions. And according to the report of this interview, it did not seem like Philip Brownlee was willing to share his sources. And I should mention the other participant in the interview was a news editor. Now, there's been a change in management at the Wichita Eagle. Last year, we got a new publisher. And within the last month, there has been a new executive editor. Hopefully, these new managers can bring some needed reform to the Wichita Eagle. Well, Facebook's good for lots of other things, too. On a recent Facebook post that someone sent to me, Wichita City Council Pete Meitzner, he represents District 2, which is East Wichita, he wrote, "Of note, Wichita is the only sizable city in Kansas that does not add any sales tax on top of the state and Sedgwick County sales tax rate." Now, it was really astonishing that Wichita City Council member Pete Meissner would brag of this, that Wichita has no city sales tax. That's because Meissner, along with all other city council members but one, voted to place the sales tax measure on the November 2014 ballot. You may remember Wichita voters rejected that sales tax. 62% of voters said no. Now, Meissner is not the only council member to brag of no city sales tax in Wichita. Just a month after the November 2014 election, in which Wichita voters rejected the sales tax, Wichita City Council member James Clendenin said in a council meeting, "Thanks to a vote we just had, Wichita has zero municipal sales tax." Now I wonder this. If the Wichita City sales tax had passed, would Meissner and Clendenin feel the same way? Well, the answer, of course, is no. If the sales tax had passed, I believe Wichita City Council members Pete Meissner and James Clendenin would be congratulating themselves on the wisdom and foresight that led them to allow Wichitans to vote on the tax. They would be boasting of their ability to gauge the sentiment of public opinion. They would be proud of the investment they are making in Wichita's future. That's important to remember. The City Council, at its initiative, decided to place the sales tax on the ballot. Now, why would the council do this if it did not believe the sales tax was a good thing for the city? Because if the tax would not be good for Wichita, well, then we have to wonder, why did the Wichita City Council, including Pete Meissner and James Clendenin, why did they decide that the people of Wichita should vote on a sales tax? Was that just a whim, a flight of fancy? Was it just a poll to gauge public opinion without binding meaning? Hey, I know what. What should we ask the City Council to let us vote on this November? Now, we have to ask, why would Wichita City Council members allow Wichitans to vote on a tax they did not personally believe in? There is no good answer to this question. So when we see Wichita City Council members boasting of no sales tax in Wichita, no city sales tax that is, remember that this was not their preference. This is especially important because during the campaign for the sales tax, the city told us we needed to spend $250 million of the tax on a new water supply. Now we know that we can satisfy our future water needs by spending much less, at least $100 million less. Well, Lily Tomlin once said, "No matter how cynical you become, it's never enough to keep up." Here we have two Wichita City Council members illustrating and reinforcing the truth of Tomlin's observation. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Is Kansas government hollowed out even though spending is rising? Well, in the Wichita Eagle this week, Burdett Loomis wrote this. He said in 2011, Governor Sam Brownback and a far-right Kansas House of Representatives began to hollow out state government, all in the name of smaller, more efficient, more private administration. Now, Burdett Loomis is a political science professor at KU, that's my alma mater, and he also worked in the Kathleen Sebelius administration when she was the governor of Kansas. Now, Loomis doesn't define what he means by hollowed out, but the measure of the size of government is spending. Not taxation, but spending, because if government spends without taxing by the same amount, well, someone has to pay eventually. Or, in the case of Kansas, we spent funds saved from years when Kansas collected more tax revenue than it spent. Yeah, we were overtaxed in those years. Then after the savings ran out, we raised taxes. In recent history, Kansas general fund spending has not fallen, except for 1 year, and that really doesn't count as hollowing out government. Yes, tax revenue declined, but what did Kansas do in response? Well, instead of cutting spending, the state engaged in deficit spending of a sorts. For 2 years in a row, Kansas spent over $300 million each year from its savings in order to support mostly increased spending. And when that savings ran out, well, the state raised taxes rather than cutting spending. This is one of the problems we're having when we discuss Kansas state government. Taxes were cut, but spending was not cut, at least not appreciably, and not cut enough to match the tax cuts. Now, at wichitaliberty.org, I have lots of charts that show Kansas government spending from the general fund and also from all funds. One chart shows total dollars spent, and one chart shows per capita spending, and both of these are adjusted for inflation. And on these charts, it's difficult to see where total spending has been cut or slashed in recent years. All fund spending has continued its upward trend with a few exceptions, and general fund spending remains level or trending slightly upwards. Well, back to Professor Loomis. He writes, "But the value of a stable, reliable state government that delivers core programs in education, transportation, health, and social services remains a bedrock element of most successful American states." Well, here Loomis alludes to cut in school spending, but education spending in Kansas is not falling. You don't have to take my word. Tables at the Kansas State Department of Education have the numbers. Now we hear a lot of people say that the increases in spending in recent years are all capers, meaning that the increased spending is all in form of contributions to the state retirement fund for teachers. And the allegation that these people make is that the state has recently changed the method of reporting capers contributions in a way that artificially inflates school spending. But the Kansas State Department of Education says the method of reporting capers has not changed for 10 years. So maybe we should ask former Governor Kathleen Sebelius why she changed the method of reporting capers contributions in a way that artificially, allegedly, inflates school spending. And by the way, when writing about reliable state services, I wish Burdett Loomis would take notice of the huge gaps in achievement in our state schools between white students and minority students. For Kansas white students, 42% are proficient in reading at grade 4. But for Kansas black students, it's only 15% proficient, and for Hispanic students, only 20%. And we see similar gaps appear in reading at grade 8 and also in mathematics at grades 4 and 8. The sad fact that this gap is reliable, occurring year after year. And as for transportation, yes, there have been transfers from the state's transportation fund to the general fund, and this has been going on for a long time. But look at actual spending on roads. KDOT's comprehensive annual financial report shows spending in the categories preservation and expansion and enhancement has grown rapidly over the past 5 years. Spending in the category maintenance has been level, while spending on modernization has declined. For these 4 categories, which represent the major source of KDOT spending on roads, spending in fiscal 2015 totaled $932 million, up from a low of $698 million in fiscal 2010. And this is actual spending on roads without regard to transfers in or out of the highway fund. And while critics of the current administration focus on transfers from the highway fund, we'll look at transfers to the highway fund. In 2006, the transfer to the highway fund was $98 million. But by 2015, it had grown to $511 million, an increase of 417%. Inflation rose by just 18% over the same period. Now, near the end of his article, Loomis writes, over the past few years, much of the political discourse has focused on shrinking revenues from tax cuts. But we should really be looking at the level of spending. That is the true measure of the size of government, and in Kansas, spending is still rising. Now, Could it be possible that even with rising state spending, that state services are still in fact being hollowed out, as Professor Loomis claims? Well, of course. Absolutely. It is, after all, government providing these services. It's quite likely we're not getting all we're paying for. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, we hear a lot of criticism of conservative as ideologues. They adhere to blind ideology, and we need to set that aside and look for practical, pragmatic solutions to perceived problems. You hear that all the time. Well, here's a short video from Prager University that talks about the difference.
One of the staple arguments of American liberals, from Presidents Woodrow Wilson to Bill Clinton, from education reformer John Dewey to New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, is that they don't believe in labels. Liberals are pragmatists and realists and empiricists. They only care about what works. Conservatives, meanwhile, are ideologues or extremists or dogmatists or just plain lunatics who are blinded by ideology. Here's what President Barack Obama said on the subject. What is required is a new Declaration of Independence, not just in our nation, but in our own lives, from ideology and small thinking, prejudice and bigotry. Did you catch that? If you have an ideology, you belong amongst the bigots and the mentally confused. Once you start paying attention, you'll hear variations on this claim all over the place. In truth, it is a very old technique, pioneered by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte, who sought to demonize his critics as mesmerized theorists enthralled to an ideology while he put the needs of the nation above all considerations. Marx picked up the technique, arguing that only the people who agreed with him were free of mind-warping ideology. The desirability and inevitability of socialism was to them a scientific fact, and therefore anyone who disagrees with scientific fact must be, in effect, brainwashed. In the 20th century, the American progressives offered their own version of the same idea. They created a whole philosophical school, pragmatism, which as a matter of principle rejected philosophical principles. William James, the most important founder of pragmatism, argued that we should measure ideas not by whether they're right or wrong, but by whether they work. Ideas are right if they have cash value, according to James. Herbert Croly, the founder of the New Republic, responding to the criticism that his liberal magazine was too pro-Mussolini, whose ideas seemed to be working in Italy at the time, said it well. If there are any abstract liberal principles, we do not know how to formulate them. Nor, if they are formulated by others, do we recognize their authority. Liberalism, as we understand it, is an activity. Contemporary American liberalism has inherited this pose. It is certain it knows what works. Liberalism. And what is liberalism? What liberals do. It's an activity. And they denigrate opposing viewpoints not as competing ideas or positions, but as the products of a warped ideological worldview. How often do you hear people say, I don't believe in labels? Whether it's liberal politicians, TV news anchors, columnists, cable news hosts, or your brother-in-law Harry, the line always goes something like this. Why can't we move beyond these partisan labels? Why can't we get beyond this philosophical divide and get to the hard work of dealing with the problems facing the American people? Warning. People only say these things when they want you to shut up and get with their program. What you never hear them say is, we need to move beyond these partisan labels. We need to get beyond the philosophical divide. And for that reason, I'm going to abandon all of my principles and agree with you. Look, I'm not saying that liberal ideological positions are wrong. That's another discussion. My point is that liberals are wrong when they say they don't have ideological principles in the first place. Moreover, there's nothing wrong with having ideological principles. To say that you have ideological principles isn't really all that different from saying that you simply have principles. Like with anything else, there are good ideologies and bad ideologies, good ideas, bad ideas. Think of ideology as a checklist of your priorities, your first principles. Do you consider economic freedom important or trivial? Is the right to life fundamental or frivolous? Is private property a more valuable principle than economic redistribution? These are all ideological questions, And asking them doesn't make you closed-minded, it makes you more serious-minded. There is no unideological answer to these questions. On abortion, for example, if you come down on the pro-life side, you're being ideological. And if you come down on the pro-choice side, you're still being ideological. The difference is that people who take their principles seriously understand that they have principles. And when they string them together, they have an ideology. It is the people who constantly reject rigorous thinking because they are afraid to be led beyond their easy instincts who are closed-minded. The fear of hypocrisy, of judging people, of making hard choices on principle. This is the fear of ideology that causes people to retreat into relativism or nihilism, or what we might here call no-labelism. As G.K. Chesterton wrote, trees have no dogmas and turnips are singularly broad-minded. In terms of ideology, serious people should aspire to be more than a tree or a turnip. I'm Jonah Goldberg for Prager University.